How about now? Adam, can you hear me now? Hello? Test, test. Adam? Let me know if you can hear me now, Adam, on the YouTube live. Man. Okay. Adam, how about the YouTube? Is it better now? Can you hear me now on YouTube live? The YouTube one is the most important because then we can take it to. Okay, it's back. It's there. All right, sweet. Great. Thanks for letting me know, man. So, all right, we're gonna go just through this really briefly. We're talking about competency and character and how, in order to have trust in any type of relationship or even in whatever you're doing in your job, for us, like it's sales, for example, you have to have high character and high competency. So you have to be the type of person who adheres to true principles to the extent that you can do that. That's going to garner trust in the relationships that you have as you're selling to people. And in order to be able to persuade them at a high level, you have to have the competency or skill set. Without either of those things, it's impossible to actually have massive success or perform at a high level. So that's really important that both of those things exist. Something that was on my mind this morning is like when we talk about the difference between being able to, well, let's go back to like the 7 habits of highly effective people. So there's this, it's like this spectrum where the whole idea is that you go from being a dependent person to being an interdependent person, and taking steps to do that makes you incredibly effective. I'm gonna put this on the side so that I can actually switch it. All right, so it's important when we talk about this to realize that like we all start out as like dependent people, right? So when you're dependent, you are relying on everyone. So like when you're a baby, you're dependent on your parents for everything. And then you gradually, as you grow, work your way into more independence so that you can independently feed yourself if you needed to, or get by and earn income if you needed to, for example. But the whole idea is to work your way into like interdependence, where in the relationships that you have, that you're not completely dependent on any one person or any one thing in order to gain like happiness or your well-being, but that you can work together as multiple independent people in order to achieve interdependence. And I thought this concept was really interesting because going to this idea of like, let's say, independence. Covey talks about how the things that help you become independent are 1, proactivity. So in order to start your the journey of going from being, this word victim has kind of been on my mind lately, how like, we've had a lot of prosperity in the United States for a minute, and especially like high performers, work with a lot of them in what I do with sales and doing door-to-door sales and coaching and helping sales reps, that a lot of the guys that are really good at selling at a high level or succeeding in business at a high level are pretty independent people. They have a high level of proactivity, and you have to in order to do that, in order to succeed wildly, right? But oftentimes when things become very comfortable, it's easy to lose proactivity. It's easy to not take responsibility for the next level of action in your life. And so it's really important to always keep the idea of proactivity in mind. And this is where we were talking about on Tuesday, where like the difference between someone who's like a victim in their life and someone who's proactive. It's not the things that happen to them. Those bad things are always going to happen to basically everybody, but it's how they respond to those bad things and gradually increasing their circle of influence so that they can now control the outcomes of their life, which is really interesting. And I really love that idea. But that's like the first step in your journey to going from a dependent person to an independent person. Really, the next one that Covey talks about is being able to begin with the end in mind. So beginning with the end in mind is all about this idea of like seeing the outcomes before they happen and then working backward from there in order to achieve goals. They have the habit of being able to do that. So this is the first creation is what Covey talks about in this. But it's not only the first creation. It's the idea that once you realize as a proactive human being that you are actually already the creator of your life, You're already the one that is responsible for the outcomes. So now that you understand that and can gain awareness of it, that it's important to realize you can then choose the future outcomes as well. And so the second habit, beginning with the end in mind, is all about actually looking forward and choosing those outcomes. And I'll tie this back into more practical things here in a minute, but just to kind of lay the groundwork. The next one, the last, I guess, habit of an independent person, someone who's kind of broken free from like the chains of, I guess, victimhood, or if you're like a low performer in sales and you want to become a high performer, these are necessary steps in order to like actually break the chains of saying like, okay, I no longer accept the fact that in certain types of areas or with certain types of people, I'm not going to actually be able to sell them, because the only reason I'm not selling them is because of the story that I'm telling myself that somehow I'm a victim to all the things that are happening to me, and I have to have the perfect circumstances in order to sell well. That's not an independent person. That's someone who's completely reliant on everything around them in order to dictate what the success they have in their life is. So then you can, once you gain control and responsibility, you can actually say, okay, now based on what I want for my life in the future, I can go choose that, work my way back and say, okay, now what are the steps we need to take, which brings us into habit 3, and that's put first things first. So putting first things first, really, this is the simple way to put it, is the idea of planning and executing. But what Covey talks about here is, and some people would say like time management, but in reality, like putting first things first is not just a time management thing. It's managing yourself against time. So think about like how profound that idea is, though. And this is, I don't think anything even that Covey came up with, rather he's like organized these thoughts really well. But this really dawned on me the last time I was reading 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I was like, okay, wait. So Covey talks about this new age of time management, but he says the idea is to not manage your schedule, but to manage yourself. The idea is to not manage time. And so that's where the words popped into my head, where I was like, whoa, so that's really interesting. It's not about managing time. It's about managing yourself against time. It's about controlling oneself. It's about dictating, like subordinating your feelings in the moment to your higher values, and making sure that those higher values are in line with correct principles, like honesty and goodness and the respect and dignity for the human soul, and kindness, charity, fairness, all of those things that are principles that are inarguable, that are beyond you and me, that we can't argue about. The story that I was thinking of yesterday, when I brought up I guess on Tuesday, I brought up this story about I went to lunch with the guy that took Mercari public. And it's funny, yesterday I sold a guy who sells retro games, like old N64 games. Did you guys ever play like Zelda and stuff on, maybe that's it. Maybe I'm just like slightly old enough to where, anyway, so he sells these like old retro games from like Segas and like N64 and stuff like that. And he sells them on Mercari. And I was like, oh, dude, what's funny is like, I know the guy that owns a lot of Mercari, and he took Mercari public. Anyway, we were talking to them, and as we were talking about this idea of the concept of goodness and true principles in business, it was just almost baffling to see how the general world sees business as separate than personal life, as separate than everything else. But in reality, like the true principles that govern a really good relationship no matter what the relationship is, even if it's like salesman to client, or if it's business to customer, boss to employee, employee to boss, etc. Those are like those same governing principles of fairness and kindness and love and decency and respect, honesty, all are principles that are inarguable. And I find that just really fascinating. So like as you're going through the habits, habit 3, putting first things first, it's about saying, okay, now that I know what my highest values are, and now that I've tried to align those highest values with the things that are actually true, so like truth that is inarguable, true principles that exist beyond what any person can argue. Once I've decided what those are and I have them deeply ingrained within me through exercises that you can do in beginning with the end in mind, like I always, if you go back and listen to a lot of my podcasts, you can find ones where I talk about this idea of like the eulogy analogy, or like imagining what it's like at your funeral and having to if you died today, like what would people actually say about you if you had to take a truth serum, right? That's kind of that's an eye-opening thought experiment to have to do. I oftentimes think about this even with like the customers that we deal with in our business, and saying like, okay, if I died today, and all the customers that I've acquired personally had to give an accounting of what their experience was like with the thing that I sold them versus what I told them it would be like, and they had to tell the truth, what would that be like to have to listen to every single one of them? Would I feel good about myself in that case? And I think that's what anyone that deals with any type of venture where you are making money based on what you're selling someone, especially with the people that work with me, that's what you really need to be asking yourself, is like, would I be able to feel good about this if this person was forced to tell the truth a year from now about their experience with me based on what I told them it would be? Now, will companies make mistakes? Yeah, obviously. But it's the fact of being able to set expectations and be honest and good about the things that you do, and then actually own those results, I think is really important. And that's the same with any relationship, right? Same thing with like in your marriage. If you said, maybe fast forward 5 or 10 years after you get married and ask yourself like, would my wife have thought it would have been like this based on what I promised her it would be like when we made vows together to get married? Well, and if not, what do I need to do to change that, right? So that's the whole idea, beginning with the end in mind. That really draws out your basic, it helps you connect to those like higher principles. And then putting first things first says, okay, now I'm going to develop the discipline, which that discipline is centered on something that gives you real true power, which is true principles. So when your discipline is ingrained or stemming from things that you hold dear, it's a lot easier to be disciplined. It's a lot easier to follow through, but you still have to subordinate your feelings to the strength of your cause, like Covey says. And that's, this is where we talk about like keeping a planner and planning and executing around priorities, executing in your life around the priorities that you actually hold most dear. And that's where first things first. But the crazy thing is like, if you go look at the personal development landscape, and we just put out a reel on this where I was talking about this in a podcast with Rich. If you look at the personal development landscape, I've got my head right in the way of that, huh? Yeah, thanks, dude. You're the man, Bjorn. Freaking Bjorn is the absolute savage wizard of all things video and actually business, come to find out. Which I didn't quite realize until we started getting deep into what we're doing on the back end with our business, and it's fast, it's amazing, it's really fun to watch. Reminds me a ton of myself early on. So really, this idea of putting first things first, again, just to reiterate, when I look at all of these principles, the first 3 habits of 7 habits of highly effective people, when I go look at the personal development landscape right now, it's really hard to find anyone talking about more than this, more than just becoming an independent person. It's enthroned. And Covey talks about this too, how becoming an independent person is really what the world really seeks and aggrandizes. But that's not the end all be all. The end goal should be becoming an interdependent person. So when you creep over into interdependence is when you start to realize that, okay, now that I am the creator of my life through proactivity, I realize that I am now, right? And the crazy thing about this is, whether you're proactive or not, you're still the creator of your life, every aspect of it. Where you are right now is a byproduct of the choices that you've made in response to the stimuli. So that gap in between the stimulus, the things that happened to you, and your response to them, you chose in that gap over time everything that you have in your life right now. And yeah, sure, are there terrible things that happen? Of course. But it's the response to those terrible things. That's where we can exercise those unique human endowments. Otherwise, might as well just be like an animal. And actually, that's actually what separates us from animals, essentially. Okay, so that's like proactivity. Then you can realize, okay, now that I'm the creator of my life, I can go create what I want, right? And I can execute around priorities and first things first to actually go do that and bring it into reality. This is the first creation where I create it in my mind, like the blueprint. I come up with the dream house. I build it, every inch of it, to the very nail and screw before I actually build it physically. Then putting first things first is using that blueprint to execute it and bring it into reality and making adjustments along the way where you actually realize maybe you didn't plan quite well enough. So then once you go to here, the idea is to become interdependent, because the nature of human reality is the fact that we are interdependent beings. So every aspect of our physical world is interdependent. And what does this mean? Okay, it's built up. All nature is built from systems and processes that they don't function alone. They function together and only together. So, like, if I die today, my heart's not going to be like, and let's say I died from like from like digestive failure or something along those lines, and it was my digestive system's fault. My heart's not going to be like, bro, your freaking digestive system, what's wrong with you? Like, why couldn't you keep us alive? And it'd be like, they're working together in order to achieve the outcome, which is to keep me alive, right? And the better I can make those systems work more interdependently together, the more healthy I become. And it's the same thing with like, I was talking with, I don't remember who this, I was talking with Rich actually in one of our podcasts where he was saying that early on in his career, whenever he'd play team sports, really, really early on, he would be like, well, if we lost, at least I had a good game. But what's the problem with someone who has a mentality like that? Even in professional sports, you see this a lot, right? Where like someone loses and they're like, well, at least I had a good game. It's like, no one cares if you had a good game, because what's the point of playing professional sports? Is it to play to have a good game individually and get sponsorships individually? Well, Tom Brady understands that it's to win as a team, right? And those who have massive success understand that it's not about any one player or person. It's about the synergy between all of them functioning in their different roles as a whole to accomplish an outcome together. So this applies perfectly to nature. And you see all the things that have survived in our physical world from an evolutionary standpoint over time have survived because they've survived in an interdependent manner. The trees that you see around us, like even if you look at like, buildings that have been around since the early like 1700s, all of them have survived because of the interdependence of the systems that are functioning within those buildings. How the foundation works with the wall voids and the structure, how all of like the beams work together, bridges that last a very, very long time. It's the same thing. It's no one aspect of it is making it survive or be strong for a long time. It's all of the aspects combined together. That's interdependence. And so we're kidding ourselves if you think that like, oh, I can become an independent person and it's just about me, right? That's not actually the case, because that betrays the nature of human reality and the nature of the physical reality of our entire world and existence. So my point is that we are actually built to be interdependent. We're not built to be alone. We're built to work together to achieve outcomes. And that those outcomes over time are what allow us to become the highest version of what humans are supposed to become, of what we're supposed to become. Now, this is like deep to go into for like something sales related, but I kind of wanted to talk about this because there's this aspect that gets really powerful. But we'll reiterate again what later on what the principles of interdependence are. Interdependence is really, Covey talks about this as seeking first to understand, then to be understood. Well, first it's win-win, think win-win, or win-win or no deal essentially is like the highest form of that. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. And then, what's the last one? Why am I blanking on this right now? Synergy. So win-win, really approaching every relationship with the frame of reference that like we either win together in this or we do not do the thing, right? There's no scenario, and I've been trying to actually think this way with my customers, because I've been trying to charge quite a bit more for you guys that look at my contract value. How much do you weigh in? What do you mean weigh in, Isaac? Oh, how much do I weigh right now? I don't know. I haven't weighed myself in a minute, dude. I've been working out on my tonal though, and it freaking kicks my butt every day. I've definitely gained a little bit of muscle even in the summer, and I'm only working out for like 30 minutes a day right now. Yeah, sorry. I'm basically blind from this distance reading words, so essentially. Yeah. So win-win essentially is once you become the type of person who's actually confident, built on true principles, proactive in your own life, executing around the priorities of your future. Thanks, Isaac. Appreciate you, man. My hair's getting too long. I need a haircut, but it's like just that perfect length that it like flows in the wind on the Segway, you know? Uh, anyway, so win-win is approaching you. Once you become this independent person, you can say, okay, now I have the confidence and strength to approach my relationships in a way that I don't want to actually be in any type of relationship unless it is a win for the person that I'm with, and being with that person is a win for me. And I'm not even talking about necessarily or specifically romantic relationships, because think about this in a way of like working with customers too for sales. So this is how I've been trying to approach this as a frame of reference to the customers that I've been selling to personally and building scripts around for our sales force is actually this idea of principle-centered selling. And I'm okay talking about this even publicly because I don't think that anyone could really copy it unless they actually feel this way about making sure their customers win. And unless they're actually selling a good product, there's no way that they would even want to approach it this way, because everyone knows it if you don't have a good product, especially the sales rep. And if they don't, it's because they're willfully ignorant about it. So as I'm approaching a customer, this is one thing I'll even say. Like I had a customer the other day where it was in a decently wealthy neighborhood, but they were, the wife was pregnant. It was their first child. They had just gone through a job change, and I could tell actually that things felt a little tight for them at the moment, and they just didn't want to take on any bills, and they would have had to cancel with the current service that they were using and pay the cancellation fee. And so as I was talking to them more, they were like, you know what, we just really want to wait till the baby. And this, I'd gone through several like loops in my sales process. They're like, we just want to wait for the baby because genuinely we just would rather not be, tight right now and in our budget. And I was like, that's fine. To be truthful with you guys, I definitely don't even want to do business with you unless it's actually a win for you. If you guys sign up for service for me and it was a win for me, but it was actually so tight on your guys' budget, even though you'd be getting an incredible service, that it was more of a lose for you, just from like your budget standpoint and all the things you have going on in your life right now, I don't want that. So like, why don't you just give me a couple days and I'll go see if I can find a provider that's close, that maybe does a little bit less, but maybe cheaper. And I can recommend them to you guys if you want. And she's like, oh, I feel bad. We'd love to go with you. Just maybe, in a couple of weeks or next month, once things kind of settle down a little bit. And I was like, no, I'm more than happy to do that actually, because I really do not want to actually do any business with a customer unless it is actually a win for both parties. And even if there's one element that's not a win for you, it's important to me that you feel that it is at the end of the day. And that customer referred like 5 different people to me, and I'm talking with them all right now, and they're all about to sign up for service. And that's really interesting. I didn't do it because of that, but it's interesting how when you actually take that approach with people and they can feel that you genuinely want to win for them and that you want it to be a mutual win. Because most people look at the relationship, especially with like in sales or in any relationship, and they're always thinking like, well, what does that person want just for themselves? And how can I protect myself, right? How can I get the best deal for me? How can I protect myself so that I don't lose here? And if you approach and people can actually feel that you genuinely want the win-win for both parties and that you're not willing to do the deal unless it's a win-win, that's a really powerful concept, and it garners so much trust. You don't do it to garner trust. You don't do it because it gets more sales. You do it because it's the right thing to do. And the byproduct of that is that by natural law, it tends to make you way, way more successful. So that's the first step of interdependence, is being able to have the confidence and ability, because you're an independent person, to approach everything, all the relationships that you engage in, as think win-win. Okay, the second one is then seek first to understand, then to be understood. And this is, some will say this is kind of about listening, but in reality, I love this first word here, seek to understand. That is when you're engaging in conversation or when you're engaging in interaction or exchange, you say, okay, how can I make sure that this person feels that I understand them? And then how can I make myself understood based on what I understand about them and what I understand about their wants, their needs, their desires, etc. So this is where I want to take I'm going to break from this and go into like a sales principle really fast, because now this gets like very granular. I've been thinking about this a ton, okay? Because oftentimes I've made the mistake of saying like, well, it's important when you're team building with your employees and not customers, but it's important when you're team building to say, hey, I really want to make sure that I'm really good at understanding. I always seek the win-win. I really want to make sure that like I'm taking time to make sure that what we're doing is in their best interest, etc. But then when I'm in a short sell with the customer, going door to door, then it's kind of different, because I'm using this tactic, this art of persuasion and influence. And I don't really have time to see if this is a good fit for them, but I know that it is because it's a better service. But I'm not really going to take the time to make sure that I feel it's almost like I was compartmentalizing those relationships essentially, and saying like, well, I work really closely with these people in like my sales force, and so that's where it's important that I do this win-win, seek first to understand sort of thing. But then with the customers, maybe not so much, even though it's not on purpose doing that, just kind of how it felt. It's more like tactical based, only persuasion, influence, only skills. And what I realized though is like, as I've been trying to transition and make sure that all of my scripts and all the scripts that we have for our reps are principle centered, all of the principles still apply. So like when you do your fact finding at the beginning, this is where this gets really good. So for all my sales reps watching, you take this, if you can have the confidence as a sales rep to be able to say, I'm not willing to do this if it's not a good fit for you. But if you know that it will probably be a good fit for them, barring any extenuating circumstance, just stating that from the beginning has been super powerful for me. So at the beginning of my script, and I would do this more if you're a couple years in selling maybe, or if you're really good, already have a bunch of sales under your belt as a rookie. But being able to tell a customer like, hey, you know what? This isn't a good fit for you. Please trust me that I'm not going to push the envelope, okay? And if it's not good timing, same thing. But I really would like to see if it is. So let's just see, for example, like who do you guys use for service so far? Okay, great. So now when you go into your fact finding, you're actually trying to seek to understand, because that's already part of the script, right? So like part of the script is basically you just go intro, then fact finding, questions, and then you go into transition, features and benefits, or your presentation, price, and then you close. And you can do this quickly with the customer. I've noticed. So like when you go into this fact finding, that is seeking to understand. That's the fact finding. Is you're saying like, hey, I don't want to do anything that's not a good fit for you. Now, the danger that I run by saying this is that you have weak-minded sales reps who use this as an out to not go be tenacious about selling. And I hate that. So like, please don't take it as that. But have the confidence enough to say like, what I'm selling, I would not be selling if I didn't think it was in their best interest. And if you are selling something you know it's not in somebody's best interest, then like you have other problems, I feel like. But if you know that you're selling something that's in someone's best interest, then you can go into it and say, and have the confidence to say, especially if you've been trying to win in your personal life, the private victories. Covey says private victories precede public victories. Show me like a sales rep or an employee that's going to go be proactive, have a driven plan for themselves, not be held down by their circumstances or the things that have happened to them or anything in their life. And those are the private victories. And I will show you someone who can massively win in the outward victories of sales and anything else that they do. So once you have the confidence of that, then you can open yourself up to say like, hey, maybe I think this is going to be a good fit, but let's just see. And I'm going to tell my customer that. So, hey, I don't want to do business unless if it's actually good for you. So let me just ask you a couple questions to see, because I promise I'm not going to push it if it's not. Do you guys use somebody already? Or you're just kind of doing it on your own? Okay, great. And so be straight with me. Like, what's your experience been like? Have you guys enjoyed having service with them? If there's one thing that you would like to continue, if you, for example, did get service with me, what would that be? You know, what's the thing that you like that they do? Okay. And now also be straight with me too. Like, are you guys actually seeing any problems that you just wish, man, I'm paying for this and I wish that they would be taking care of it? Because it might be common stuff that like you're just seeing and that you might be seeing, you see with me too slightly. But more often than not, if you do have those issues, I think that I could probably be a solution for you. And again, I don't want you to do anything that's not in your best interest, but like, help me understand here. Oh, okay, cool. So what you're telling me as the customer, what you're telling me is that you guys are paying for service and you pay just to have the protection, but oftentimes, like when you really think about it, maybe it's kind of annoying that you have to call them out so much. Or you're paying for protection, but maybe it's kind of annoying that you always have to ask them to do this one thing whenever they treat, right? Am I understanding that right? Okay, great. So listen, based on everything that you've said, now I'm going to get into what's really interesting about this. So this habit 5 is seek first to understand, and then what's the second part? Then to be understood, right? So look at the script. I introduce myself, then I do brief fact finding, and then now that I've sought first to understand, now I can be understood by saying, okay, listen, now based on what you've said, what you've just told me, and do you feel like I actually understand your situation? Okay, great. Well, listen, Kathy, based on what you just said, I think you're really going to like this. And let me show you why. So the first thing is, now you were talking about how you still kind of worry about the kids outside when they're playing in the yard because of the fire ants or whatever, right? Or you're still kind of worried about problem X, Y, and Z. Well, listen, a lot of my customers really like what I do because they don't have to worry about this. And this is why. And here's a couple reviews I can show you that actually dictate that what I'm saying is true. Does that make sense? You see how that starts to be like a better option for you maybe? Now, again, if you're feeling like it might not be, that's not a big deal. But do you get why so many people might be upgrading right now? Okay, awesome. So let me just leave you with some pricing then, and we can see if I'm going to try to make it compelling enough to go with me right now, but we can just see and feel it out, all right? And then you can go into the next part, and that's price. I love selling like this. It feels so much better than the quick, just let me get a win for me. Who cares about the customer? And I'm not saying that I've ever really sold like that, but I know people that have. That don't work with me, and I just wouldn't be able to live with myself doing it that way. So therefore, I don't do it. But if you guys have questions about this, let me know. But I think that this is a really interesting concept. If nothing else, this is like the game changer to develop trust in relationships with sales. But it's also the very thing that applies to all the relationships and trust in them. So why is it such a, I mean, it almost, as I was thinking about this morning, I was like, freak, that's so cool how this fits into principle-centered selling. I'm like, yeah, well, it just makes sense. Why wouldn't it fit in? It's a true principle, so therefore it would apply. Therefore, it must apply to all relationships, especially transactional ones. Because if you think about it, all relationships are transactional anyway, whether it's for money or something else, but not in a way of like, again, if it was transactional in a win-lose way, that's when they get really bad, right? But when love is transactional in a way of service and sacrifice, then that's a really good, loving relationship. But, we're kind of all transacting something in a relationship. It's just whether or not it's mutual and whether or not it's in someone's best interest. That's what makes it a principle-centered thing or not. So, and dang, that could be taken kind of out of context there, but, hopefully not. All right, guys, that's all I've got for now. Thanks for tuning in. Sorry this was a little bit longer, but I kind of want to do more of these, and we're going to talk more about this on like Tuesdays and Thursdays. And I'm going to start bringing in some of our leaders too, our directors of sales, to just kind of chit-chat on this stuff and shoot the bull a little bit. Go ahead, Bjorn.
We have a question from TikTok.
Yeah, sweet. We had a lot of people on TikTok yesterday. How many are there today?
I can't see total right now. We have 759 likes.
Nice.
But best advice for college grads starting with
Come work for me. That's the best advice, I would say. Yeah. No, actually, I'm still hiring a lot for this sales season, and I would say the best advice for recent college grads, yeah, do something incredibly hard. And here's the advice that I got from one of Warren Buffett's like previous CFO. I had the chance to sit down and talk with him 6 years ago, and I was in my early 20s. I'm still in my 20s now, but I was just home from a mission. It was a couple years after being home from a mission for my church, and one of the things that I asked was like, what advice would you give to your former self in your 20s? If you go back into your 20s, what advice would you give yourself? And he said, I'd give myself the same advice that I took and that I applied, and that is work every hour of my 20s to build a life for myself so that I set myself up to earn as much possible later in my life, but work every waking hour to build something for myself in my 20s. And that's exactly what I've done, and it starts to compound exponentially. But within that, I would say make sure that you're actually challenging yourself and doing something really, really hard. We're not built to be complacent and comfortable. So everything about the natural, like, what the world would tell you to do is to make sure you get into a comfortable and complacent place. Go get a comfortable salary job. Make sure that you settle down in a house that you can afford. I'm not saying be in a house you can't afford, but my wife and I have moved at least once every 6 months for since we've been married for the last 6 years. And I've moved once every 6 months for the last 10 years, if not more. I guess when I was on my mission, I was moving every 6 weeks about to. So since I was 18, I've moved at least once every 6 months to a different part of the country or the world, all working every waking hour and trying to build something that would last for a very, very, very long time. And the only way you can do that is by getting really uncomfortable and by learning skills that will help you do it. And the skills that you need to learn are, you need to develop a character like this, like what I'm talking about, and you need to learn the competency and skill set of persuasion and influence, but in a principle-centered way. And why I'm saying come work for me is because I just don't know that you'll find that really. And I'm not trying to be arrogant about that, but like, go show me someone who teaches from 7 Habits of Highly Effective People in an effective way and can teach you how to persuade and influence at a high level with a track record. I've done it with over 1,000 people already in my life, and am planning on doing it with thousands more. And so if you're just graduating from college, I would not go get an MBA, although I plan on personally on getting one, but the landscape even there is changing, so it makes me not want to really these days. But I would not go get a salary job and make yourself comfortable. I'd go do something very difficult and learn the art and skill of persuasion and influence. And I don't think that there'd be anybody better to do it with than myself and my team. So let me know. Any other questions? All right, ladies and gents, thanks for being on, and I appreciate you guys. If you're one of my sales reps, make sure you share this with everybody so that they can listen to it. Bjorn, thanks for setting this all up, man. Bjorn's a perfect example of this. You're just turned 20, right? And I asked him like 4 months ago. I was like, "Hey man, will you come out to Dallas and work with me like really closely all summer during the sales season?" And he just up and left and did it and is here. And it's like, it's that I will ensure that it is the best thing that you've ever done for yourself, but you're making it the best thing that you've ever done for yourself. Okay, guys, we'll see you on the next one. See you tomorrow.